When I was 16, my parents kicked me out, saying I was a burden who'd never amount to anything. 13 years later, I watched my parents walk into federal court in handcuffs, sentenced to 7 years behind bars for the very scheme they chose over their own son. Now they won't stop calling me from prison, begging me to bail them out. I, 29M, stood in the back of the federal courtroom wearing a suit that cost more than everything I owned when I was 16. The irony wasn't lost on me. The bailiff led them in through the side door. My mother had aged badly. Prison orange washed out her already pale complexion, and her hair hung limp around her shoulders instead of the carefully styled waves she used to maintain. My father shuffled beside her, thinner than I remembered, his shoulders hunched forward in defeat. Neither of them saw me in the gallery. They were too focused on the judge, their lawyer, the reality of what was happening. 7 years. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as he read the sentence. Securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. The list went on. My father stared straight ahead. My mother covered her face with her hands. I felt nothing. Maybe that should have bothered me, but it didn't. The memories came anyway. I was 16 when they sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I needed to leave. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Not because I was violent or using drugs or failing school. I was simply in the way. My mother explained it like she was discussing the weather. They had an opportunity, a business venture that required their full attention and resources. I was old enough to figure things out on my own. My father nodded along, already mentally counting whatever money they thought they'd make. I asked where I was supposed to go. My mother suggested I call some friends. My father said I'd never amount to anything anyway. So what difference did it make whether I left now or in 2 years? Those exact words. A burden who'd never amount to anything. I packed a duffel bag that night. Took my birth certificate, social security card, the $300 I'd saved from my part-time job at the grocery store. I left before dawn because I couldn't stand to see their faces again. The first month was hell. I slept in my car, a beat-up Honda that barely ran. I parked behind the grocery store where I worked, showered at the gym using a membership I couldn't really afford. My manager noticed something was off. She was older, had kids of her own. She didn't pry, but she started scheduling me for more hours. I ate dented cans and day-old bakery items the store couldn't sell. One night, she asked me directly if I had somewhere to live. I tried to lie, but I'd never been good at it. She made a phone call right there, and within an hour, I was meeting her brother who managed an apartment complex across town. He had a studio in the basement, technically a storage room with a bathroom. $200 a month. I took it. I finished high school at night, working full-time during the day. Slept 4 hours if I was lucky. The guidance counselor tried to talk to me about college, but I couldn't think that far ahead. I was focused on surviving the week, making rent, keeping gas in my car. Then I met someone at work who changed everything. He was a regular customer, always bought the same things, always polite. We got to talking one day, and he asked what I was doing with my life. I told him the truth. Working, trying to save money, no real plan beyond that. He owned a small IT consulting company and needed someone to help with basic troubleshooting and customer service. No experience necessary, he'd train me. The pay was double what I made at the grocery store. I started the next week. Turned out I was good with computers, good with people. I learned fast, stayed late, took on extra projects. Within a year, he promoted me. Within 2 years, I was managing client accounts. He taught me everything about the business, treated me like family. When he retired 5 years later, he sold me the company at a price I could actually afford, with terms that made it possible. I grew it, hired good people, landed bigger contracts, expanded into cybersecurity and cloud services. The business tripled in size, then doubled again. Last year, we cleared $8 million in revenue. My personal net worth hit 7 figures 2 years ago. I never contacted my parents. Never looked them up online. Never drove by the old house. They made their choice, and I made mine. Then 6 months ago, I got a call from someone claiming to be a federal investigator. He wanted to know about my relationship with my parents. I told him I didn't have one. He asked when I'd last spoken to them. 13 years ago, I said. He seemed surprised, but moved on to other questions. Had they ever discussed their business with me? Had they asked me to receive packages or transfer money? No and no. The call lasted 10 minutes. I Googled them after hanging up. Found news articles. My parents had been running an investment scheme for over a decade. They convinced people to invest in what they claimed were high-yield offshore accounts. Early investors got paid returns from money coming in from new investors. Classic pyramid structure. They'd swindled over 40 people out of nearly $6 million. Some victims lost their retirement savings. One woman lost money she'd set aside for her daughter's cancer treatment. I read every article I could find. Looked at their photos in the news coverage. They'd been living well. Big house in an expensive suburb. Luxury cars. Vacation photos on social media showing trips to Europe, the Caribbean, Hawaii. All funded by stealing from people who trusted them. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I didn't attend until the final day, the sentencing. I wanted to see it end. Now I stood in the courthouse parking garage, loosening my tie, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Another voicemail. I checked the messages. My mother's voice, shaky and desperate. She'd somehow gotten my number. She was crying, saying she was sorry, that they never meant for things to go this far. She needed my help. They needed money for commissary, for phone calls, for better legal representation to appeal the sentence. I was their son. I had to help them. Family was supposed to stick together. The second message was my father. More direct, more demanding. He'd heard I was doing well, running a successful business. They were family. Blood. I owed them. They'd raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head for 16 years. The least I could do was help them now when they needed it most. I deleted both messages. The calls kept coming. Every few days at first, then daily. Different numbers, always collect calls from the prison. I blocked each one. They found my business number. My assistant started screening calls from correctional facilities. They wrote letters. Long, rambling things that swung between apology and accusation. My mother wrote about how hard my childhood had been for her, how stressed they'd been about money. My father wrote about family obligation, about duty, about how I'd be nothing without them giving me life. I burned the letters without finishing them. Update 1. 3 weeks after the sentencing, my uncle showed up at my office. I barely recognized him. I hadn't seen him since I was maybe 12. He was my father's younger brother, lived a few states away. My assistant tried to stop him, but he pushed past her, barged into my office like he owned the place. He wanted to talk about my parents, about how I needed to step up. They were family, and they were suffering. The conditions in federal prison were terrible. They needed money for basic necessities. They needed a good lawyer for the appeal. They were counting on me. I let him finish. Then I asked him one question. Where was he when they kicked me out at 16? He shifted uncomfortably. Said he didn't know about that. They'd told him I'd gone to live with a friend, that it was my choice. I laughed. Actually laughed in his face. Told him I'd lived in my car. Worked 2 jobs. Finished school sleeping 4 hours a night in a basement storage room. Asked him if that sounded like a choice. He tried to backtrack. Said that was in the past. This was about the present. About doing the right thing now. I told him the right thing was exactly what I was doing. Nothing. They made their choices. I made mine. He could leave. He got angry then. Started yelling about how I was heartless, how I'd changed, how money had made me cold. I buzzed security. They escorted him out while he shouted about karma and family and blood. I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little bit. Update 2. 2 months in, and the pressure increased. My mother's sister reached out through LinkedIn. Distant cousins I'd never met found me on social media. Even an old family friend tried to add me on Facebook with a message about how my parents needed support. They all had the same script. Family comes first. Everyone makes mistakes. They'd suffered enough. I had the means to help and therefore the obligation. None of them had reached out when I was homeless at 16. Not one of them had asked if I needed help, needed a place to stay, needed anything at all. But now they crawled out of nowhere with their hands out and their expectations ready. I made my social media private. Told my assistant to screen more carefully, but they found other ways. Someone left a voicemail at my house. My girlfriend at the time asked who they were and why they kept calling about my parents being in prison. That was a fun conversation. She knew I was estranged from my family, but not the details. I told her everything. She was horrified. At them, not me. We broke up 3 weeks later for unrelated reasons, but the timing felt connected somehow. Then my mother got clever. She used another inmate's phone privileges to call me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered before realizing what it was. Her voice hit me like cold water. She was sobbing, begging. She talked about how sorry she was, how she thought about me every day, how kicking me out was the biggest mistake of her life. She said they'd been desperate back then, thought the business opportunity would set them up for life so they could help me later. It spiraled out of control. They never meant to hurt anyone. I listened to all of it. Then I asked her a simple question. When exactly had she planned to help me later? When I was sleeping in my car? When I was eating expired food? When I was working myself to exhaustion just to survive? Which of those moments had she thought about me? She didn't have an answer. Just more crying. More apologies. She said I was successful now, so clearly everything worked out. I'd done well for myself. Didn't that prove they'd been right to push me to be independent? I told her to lose my number. She started screaming. The call cut off. Update 3. 4 months after sentencing, I got a letter from their attorney. Official law firm letterhead, professional language. They were requesting financial assistance for the appeal process. As their only child and closest living relative, I had a moral and potentially legal obligation to provide support. I forwarded it to my lawyer. She laughed, told me there was no legal obligation whatsoever. I was an adult. They were adults. Their poor decisions were not my responsibility. She sent a formal response declining on my behalf and warning against further contact. That should have been the end of it. Instead, my father tried a different approach. He filed a complaint with the prison system claiming I'd stolen money from them years ago and that my business was built on their initial investment. Complete fabrication. The prison investigated, found no evidence because there wasn't any, dismissed it. But my father must have known it would go nowhere. He just wanted to cause problems for me. Wanted to make my life difficult the way his life was difficult. I had my lawyer send a cease and desist. No more calls. No more letters. No more false claims. Any further contact would result in a restraining order and potential legal action for harassment. The communication stopped. For about 3 weeks. Then I got an email from a journalist. She was writing a story about white-collar crime and family estrangement. She'd heard about my situation and wanted my perspective. Someone had reached out to her, someone connected to my parents, and fed her a version of events where I was the villain. The ungrateful son who abandoned his parents in their darkest hour despite having the means to help. I agreed to talk to her, told her everything, showed her documentation. The investigators' report confirming I hadn't spoken to my parents in 13 years. Records from my high school showing I'd been enrolled in night classes while listing my address as that basement apartment. Bank statements from back, then showing my poverty-level income. Tax returns proving I'd built my business from nothing without any family investment. The story ran 2 weeks later. Fair and balanced. It included quotes from some of their victims. One woman talked about losing her retirement. Another man talked about his daughter's medical bills. The journalist presented the facts clearly. My parents were criminals who'd hurt dozens of people. I was a victim of their selfishness long before their legal troubles began. The article spread online. People shared it, commented on it. Most supported my decision. Some called me cold. I didn't care either way. Update 4. I'm writing this 6 months after their sentencing. The calls have mostly stopped. I still get the occasional letter, but I don't open them anymore. My assistant just files them away in case I ever need documentation of harassment. My business is doing better than ever. I hired a new director of operations. We landed a major contract with a healthcare system. I'm looking at expanding to 2 more cities. Last week I took a meeting with a nonprofit that helps homeless youth. Kids who aged out of foster care, kids who got kicked out by their families, kids like I was. They needed help building out their IT infrastructure. I did it for free and wrote them a check for $50,000. The director cried, told me I was changing lives. That meant something. More than anything my parents ever said to me. I think about them sometimes. Wonder what they tell themselves to sleep at night. If they blame me. If they blame each other. If they figured out yet that the scheme they chose over their son was never going to work. Mostly I don't think about them at all. They made me a burden. Told me I'd never amount to anything. Kicked me out to chase money they ended up stealing from innocent people. Now they're facing 7 years in federal prison, and I'm the one they call when they want help. The answer is no. Will always be no. They taught me that family is only family when it's convenient. That love has conditions. That some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. I learned the lesson well. They wanted me to amount to something. I did. Just not for them. Not because of them. Despite them. That's my revenge. Not anger or spite or active cruelty. Just success. Just moving forward. Just living well while they face the consequences of their choices. They call from prison and I don't answer. They write letters and I don't read them. They send relatives and lawyers and journalists and I tell the truth. I was 16 when they threw me away. I'm 29 now and I've built a life they can't touch. That's all the closure I need.